For more on what to expect from the BRICS group and the summit, I'm joined by Ravi Ramamurti. He's a distinguished professor and director at the Center for Emerging Markets at Northeastern University in Boston. Welcome to the show. Good to see you, Professor. When you think of the group as a whole, I mean, certainly they've gotten a lot more political clout. Certainly they've gotten a lot more economic clout. But they've talked about this bank since last year, and now it's coming to fruition. Is it going to be as successful as they would like it to be?
Well, I think it has the potential to be quite successful. The needs for investment in infrastructure are so great in these countries, and even more broadly in the emerging markets, that you could have a number of banks, including this one, playing important roles in the years to come. I think it's remarkable that we've come this far, that the bank has actually been created. It now has a president, it has a functioning board, and so on. But I think the interesting news to me is the other bank that China has also helped to create, which is the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And my feeling is that that bank, in the long run, will end up playing a more prominent role than even the National Development Bank.
How do all these banks work together? I mean, you already talked about the AIIB, and then we've got, of course, the IMF, and we've also got the World Bank as well, and there's some other smaller ones. I won't get into it, but we got a lot of banks, basically. How do they all work together? Do they actually compete for our audience who may not be as finance-oriented? I'm guessing they work together?
Well, they could work together. They could co-sponsor projects. They could each put in some money when the projects are large. But they could also take on projects that the other players might not be willing to take on for any number of reasons. So at some level, they compete, but they also can complement each other and spread the risks across these projects by taking portions of the investment in some of the large projects.
The BRICS country used to be, when I was working on the trading desk, sort of the best thing in the whole world because they had the highest amount of growth rates, you had the best demographics, you had all the right numbers. Today it's so much different. Brazil's struggling, Russia's in trouble, China's growth is slowing. I mean, there are a lot of question marks. I'll leave India aside here, but what's the main concern when you think about this particular group?
Well, the whole concept of the BRICS was an artificial creation, as you know, was coined by somebody at Goldman Sachs. The main defining characteristic of the BRIC countries was that they were the four largest emerging markets at the time. And then South Africa was added into the group. But other than the fact that they were the four largest markets, there was really important markets outside the developed economies. You wouldn't necessarily pick these four. It started off with the idea that it should serve the needs of these five countries. And I think that is one of its major limitations going forward. The other limitation is I'm not sure this model is
talking about the sanctions, and some are saying that this is a little bit, potentially they could team up and argue about the West. Your thoughts, does this have anything to do with those sanctions?
Well, for Russia, I think it's nice to belong to a club where it's a welcome member in the club. And at this juncture particularly, I think having the opportunity to host the summit this year gives Russia something to compensate for being somewhat of a pariah in the eyes of many of the Western countries. So I think for Russia, that's probably the most important benefit of being a part of this club. Some people have argued that Russia really shouldn't have been part of this club because it wasn't and hasn't been a long-term growth story. Even Brazil, to some extent, has been a bit shaky in terms of its growth prospects. So really, the two big players are India and China. And eventually, I think, and particularly among the two of them, China is even more prominent than India is. And China is, I think, beginning to get comfortable, particularly under President Xi, to assert its own point of view. Yeah. And I see that reflected in the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, where China will have control of the bank, at least have veto power over the affairs of the bank. The bank will be headquartered in Beijing, and the president of the bank is likely to be Chinese. And the irony is that this configuration is very similar to that of the World Bank itself, which was headquartered in the U.S. and controlled by Western powers.
In the finance world, we call that having a little bit of a leverage. Professor from Northeastern University,
Right.
Thank you very much for joining us from Boston, explaining what all this means.